and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Jim Keys. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, so for those who don't know yet, Jim is going to be joining us at the Starting Small Summit in April. So first of all, it's a huge honor. I'm super excited. But Jim is also the ex-CEO of 7-Eleven and Blockbuster and the author of Education is Freedom. So Jim, to kick things off, I always like to start with this question. If you can share just a glimpse, what would you say your upbringing was like? And then also, where did you grow up?
Well, I know the concept is starting small. I started microscopic, I guess.
Yeah.
uh, I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, and I get teased about it because literally it was a 3-room shack with no running water and no indoor plumbing and all that stuff. And
Wow.
people tease me about it because it's so hard to imagine today that people actually lived that way.
Mm.
And I'm not that old, but but if you get about 30 or 40 miles west of Boston, it can get pretty rural out there. And that's basically what it was. Too many kids, not enough money. My grandfather hand built the house.
Wow.
Shack, intended to put plumbing in, never got around to it, couldn't afford it. And, so yeah, I started, you could call it humble beginnings.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, where would you say some of your drive and motivation came from growing up, especially from that background and what you've been able to accomplish today? Where would you say that came from?
Yeah, it's part of what I put in the book, and a big motivation for the book. Think about it. The title is Education is Freedom.
Yeah.
The future is in your hands. And I'm sort of the living example of that there wasn't I didn't have any safety net. There was nobody to take care of me. My mom split when I was 5 years old because she went uptown to the trailer park because they had running water there, and
Yeah.
my dad ended up passing when I was like 12 years old. So, I mean, I was just sort of a case study in dealing with, all kinds of negative change that can happen to kids. But in my case, I channeled that adversity into opportunity, into being incredibly resilient and willing and able to deal with change. So I call it, when I talk to kids today, I really call it my superpower. That adversity led to really me being the person I am today. In fact, there's an expression, a Latin expression that I love. It's called per aspera ad astra, from difficulties to the stars. And I mean, that's kind of my life.
Yeah. I love that. So going into schooling, then I'm curious, what did that look like growing up for you? So I mean, your background kind of rough growing up, but also getting into education, the desire to even go to college at that stage. I know it's tough on kids. I'm curious, the schooling route for you, what did that look like?
Yeah, I was a public school kid, and thank God for teachers because they were a big inspiration. I'm sure that it was teachers who took me aside and encouraged me and saw something in me and said, "Hey, you're a smart kid. You can do this stuff." And they gave me opportunity. They encouraged me along the way, and between that and my dad, and basically giving me the admonition, don't do what I did. He dropped out of school. He and my mom both quit school in the 6th grade, and that led them to a life in the factory, which was pretty tough. So I wanted to avoid that, and I was given a lot of encouragement along the way. And I as a result, just never stopped to think that college wouldn't be an option. I didn't know how I would pay for it. Literally, I was told by guidance counselors, you can't afford it. Don't even think about it. And yet, I figured that that was really the only pathway out of that sort of factory life that I really didn't want. So it worked.
I'm sure the listeners are curious. So with the guidance counselors mentioning that, and I mean, your own background, how did you then navigate to get into school, and what did the financing look like there? Scholarships?
No, I didn't even. Here's the crazy part. First of all, there weren't the scholarships available. There's a lot of narrative today that college is so much more expensive today and all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And if you do the math and you do it in today's dollars, my $10,000 a year room, board, and tuition at the
Wow.
time, in today's dollars would have been 40, 50,000 bucks.
Yeah.
So it's not that much more expensive. But the big thing is there is a ton of scholarship money out there today, massive billions of dollars worth of different opportunities. Even the schools today, the college that I went to today has almost a 50% what they call discount rate,
Mm.
which calculates the amount of financial aid that they provide to kids. So here's the difference. When I was trying to go to school myself, I went to work or at an early age, like 15, 16 years old. As soon as I could get a job, I was flipping burgers at McDonald's.
Mm.
During the summertime, I was driving a produce truck, working crazy hours, and then working
Wow.
McDonald's at night after working a full shift on a produce truck during the day,
Wow.
all to try to save money. So I saved up something like 5 grand in the first couple of years before college. And then I applied for financial aid and they said, well, you got enough money for the first year.
Wow.
And they gave me
Wow.
nothing, like zero,
Wow.
which was really annoying. So I went out and bought a nice car and lived at home instead of paying for room and board. But yeah, it worked. And so the combination of student loans and working my butt off, basically, to try to figure out how to pay for it, it
Mm.
worked. And the opportunity is the same today.
Yeah.
We got to be careful that people don't listen to the narrative, because the same narrative was there when I was a kid. You can't afford it. It's not for you,
Mm.
for rich kids, that kind of thing. And that's just such a damaging narrative, because it's what keeps people trapped in that
Yeah.
environment, unfortunately.
For sure. Wow, that's such an living example of seriously starting small, starting microscopic. Like what you've been able to do is really incredible. Getting into schooling, then, what did you end up studying, and then what were some of those aspirations post graduation that you were looking to do or interested in at that time?
Well, this is one of the other challenges of kids that grow up in that environment without role models, without parents who, are professionals or in the working world. I had no idea.
Mm.
I thought, and this is the case with most kids that grow up in some sort of poverty, you look around and you have no worldview at all. So you don't know CEOs, you don't know,
Yeah.
corporate executives or people in accounting firms or professional. So
Mm.
doctors and lawyers.
Yeah.
And that was my frame of reference. I said, well, they make money. They're sort of professional. I want to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Mm.
And literally I applied my first application to undergraduate school. I applied pre-med.
Okay.
Bad idea. Bad idea. I mean, I think being a doctor would be really gross. I mean, I, I'd have a hard time between being grossed out by things and having a really bad sense of humor. I'd be like in the middle of an operation, start laughing, going, "Yeah, look at that." I'd be a bad doctor. Well, they didn't accept me early admission into the pre-med program, so I said, no problem, I'll switch, and I pivoted to, I'll be a
Mm.
lawyer, and again, I would have been a terrible lawyer. I was intercepted senior year as I was getting ready to go to law school. I'd been accepted to a couple of law schools.
Mm.
And I had a professor in college intercept me and say, Jim, you promised me you will get an MBA. I was like, well,
Wow.
what's an MBA?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you're going to be a better businessman than lawyer. I was like, I don't want to be a businessman, because to me, that was the factory.
Mm.
I don't want anything to do with business. Business is, I'm trying to get out of that. And
Yeah.
I didn't understand. I had no frame of reference, zero,
Mm.
nada. So he talked me into, he said, at least apply for a JD MBA. And one of the only schools that offered it at the time was Columbia
Mm.
University. So I applied thinking there's no way in a million years I can get into Columbia University. And sure enough, the business school accepted me. The law school waitlisted me.
Mm.
So I said, well, heck, I'll just start at the business school. I'll do it backwards.
Yeah.
And I ended up 1 year in business school, then was getting ready to go back and go to law school, and I had an internship. Um, and I worked for an oil company, major oil company, now Chevron.
Mm,
And they said, forget about the MBA, forget about the JD, just come to work for us. And since I was half starving to death trying to live in New York City and go to school and pay
yeah.
tuition, I took them up on it and never looked back. Yeah,
Wow.
began a good career trajectory for me.
So I'm curious at that time, so from the internship, what did that next position look like that was kind of the convincing point to step away from business school and then actually take this opportunity? I'm curious, what were you doing at that time?
Yeah, I had a really intriguing opportunity at the first job. I was working for the chief financial officer of Gulf Oil, now Chevron,
Wow.
and they were doing M&A work, and so I was the beneficiary of. It's really funny looking back at it, but I
Mhm.
had one of the first PCs.
Wow.
They were still literally back in the day doing punch card computers, so they had a computer department, and you'd tell them what you wanted them to do, and they'd run this big deck of punch cards through a big giant
Wow.
computer, and it would take days to get an answer.
Yeah.
And so I dragged this clunky box into the office, and I start using a PC. And so
Wow.
what would take a week normally to get data back from the data department, from the computer department, I was cranking it out in 10 minutes after the market closed, running up to the chief financial officer's office. And they thought I was a genius because I
Yeah.
was, I was able to do this spreadsheet stuff like
That's
almost
incredible.
immediately. Yeah, it was funny. It's funny looking back at it, how it was basically just adopting technology,
Yeah.
an early adopter. And
So
so, yeah, that took off. So my career there took off, but then they merged. Gulf
okay.
and Chevron merged. I had gotten promoted a couple of times. I was doing pretty well, and I was still very, very young. And the Chevron guys, the culture there was one of more, tenured employee. That they were a little bit more mature, more conservative company.
Mm,
And they said, "We don't know how you got to this job this fast, but here you're going to have to pay your dues."
mm,
And that kind of freaked me out a little bit. But it turned out another opportunity opened up. 7-Eleven had just acquired an oil company
mm.
to supply gasoline to their stores, and they needed people from the industry. So they hired one of my former bosses at Gulf to run Citgo Petroleum, which was now part of 7-Eleven.
Yep.
And he brought me in and made me head of strategic planning. So at
Wow.
23 years old or something like that,
That's incredible.
I'm running planning for a division of 7-Eleven, their oil company division. And we ended up selling the company and keeping a long-term supply agreement. And 7-Eleven asked me to stay and run their retail gasoline business. So that was
Wow.
my path of entry into 7-Eleven.
That's incredible. So with this oil background and then it eventually transitioning into retail, what was that shift like for you? I know you've already probably been very submerged into it by that point, but what did that shift and that transition into 7-Eleven look like for you?
Well, first of all, I was an oil industry expert, right? I knew
Yeah.
I knew jack about the oil industry. I was a kid right out of grad school
Yeah,
running numbers.
23 is crazy.
Yeah, crunching numbers for the CFO. But I came from an oil company. So I go to
Yeah.
7-Eleven where nobody has any oil background. And I was now the industry expert. So
Mm,
they let me run the retail side of the gasoline business, but I knew nothing about running retail gasoline. So
yeah.
I had to basically learn as I go. And it turned out to be an advantage because everybody running retail gasoline in that period of time came from an oil company. And the
Mm,
oil companies basically weren't making money at retail. They were making all their money upstream. So
yeah.
here's a vertically integrated company just using downstream retail gasoline as a loss leader, if you will, just because they wanted to sell more barrels of oil,
Mm,
and the more they could sell at retail, the more they could produce, and that was where they're making all their money.
yeah.
So here I get into a retail environment, and I discovered nobody's really making money at this. So again, enter technology, I
Mm.
said, if I can use data and figure out how much more money I can make, 1 cent a penny, 1 penny above competition, and look at the volume impact, 1 penny below competition, look at the volume impact. And if I can optimize the profits from the gasoline by figuring out what the right price is versus competition versus the volume I'm able to get, we're going to make a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So I did. So I built this whole database and used the PC again to do it, where we now went from basically the way people used to set gasoline prices is they'd look across the street and see what somebody was priced at and go,
Mm.
I guess I'll charge a penny above or below.
Yeah.
And so I was saying, well, I couldn't figure out who was ultimately making the decision because everybody was pricing off of somebody else. So I
Mm.
said, well, what if we lead? What if
Mm.
we use data and actually set the price higher to make more money? Will everybody follow us? And what we found is that's exactly what happened. We started to
Interesting.
lead the market and made more money, as a bunch more money as a result. Turns out today, if you dial forward, that same use of data ended up being copied by third-party companies that then sold that technology to all
Mm.
the oil companies. And today, everybody uses data to
Yeah.
make more informed decisions. And that's part of why gas prices are where they are today versus where they were, back in the day.
Yeah. Interesting. So at this point, what did this journey of growth within the company look like for you? So I mean, you brought a lot to the table here at this point, the discovery of utilizing the data for gas prices, but what did that growth journey look like? I know you write about the hierarchy stages in your book. I'm curious, kind of the growth journey within 7-Eleven for yourself.
Yeah, it turned out it was a constant learning process because remember I started on the finance side of the business,
Yeah.
then went to operations, and then 7-Eleven ended up the gasoline operations did extremely well, but the rest of the business tanked.
Mm.
And so I ended up going back from operations into finance to run a strategic plan for the whole business, not just the gasoline side of the business, because the business was tanking. It was 7-Eleven filed bankruptcy in 1991.
Wow.
So I ended up with, again, you think about there's a consistent theme here. Every time a change would happen, it would
Mhm.
lead to a personal opportunity for me.
Yeah.
And going all the way back to my childhood, it was like, what are they going to do? Take my house? They did
Mm.
already. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no downside here. In every change, there's an opportunity. So I've now coined that expression, change equals opportunity.
Mm.
Interestingly, acronym CEO.
Yeah.
That's
Love it.
that's exactly what propelled my career. While everybody else during a time of crisis or change would be behaving badly,
Mm.
head down, belligerent, arguing, fighting, corporate politics, nasty stuff, basically. That's what
Yeah.
happens during change when people are afraid of the change.
Mm.
Instead, I had my head up saying, hey, we're going to get through this. It's an opportunity for us.
Yeah.
Let's reinvent ourselves. And that positive response ended up being personally a great opportunity because I came out of the bankruptcy with this privilege of running strategic planning and then ultimately being CFO of the company.
Wow.
And the change was good for the company because the merchandise side of the business was very badly broken. It had 10 years of declining same-store sales.
Mm.
And by taking it through a restructuring, the crisis that forced us to restructure created an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves.
Mm. Interesting. So getting into some of the maybe like milestones once you developed within the company, what would you reflecting back? I know there's some very neat milestones that you brought to the table. Maybe if you can talk about store expansions, what was the current stage when you joined, especially in the executive leadership team, to then your departure. What did that growth of 7-Eleven look like? Maybe to
Oh,
start with stores.
I can't remember the number of stores, but probably from 20 to 40,000 stores or something like that during a period of time. We actually went through a period of time of shrinking
Mm,
stores during the financial crisis that we went through. Had to
yep.
close a lot of markets and then rebuild from scratch. So we had a lot of years of actually declining store sales, and then we took off and started to grow again. And today they have 80,000 stores worldwide.
Wow.
So yeah, we put them, I think, on a pretty good trajectory for growth, and not just store count, but also profitability.
It's incredible. I know there's a personal story within a discovery that you did with the aluminum can that you actually brought. If you can reflect on that story to our listeners as well, I find it super fascinating. So, was it the beer aluminum can that you brought to the
Yeah,
U.S.?
yeah, yeah. It's kind of a silly story, but it's a fun one. It
Yeah.
it. I was trying to establish a culture of change within the company, because literally, especially at retail, things change constantly, and retailers are notorious about waiting until something's a proven success and then they
Mm,
adopt it. Well, by then everybody's got it. So
yeah.
what's the big deal? It's not an advantage anymore. So I was constantly looking all over the world for new products, and what I discovered is in Asia or in Europe, you'll find things on the market that we don't even have here.
Mm.
And this was one of them. I was literally in a mini bar in Japan, having one of those lost in translation moments. Jet lag, tired, couldn't sleep, wake up at 3 a.m. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Open the mini bar, let me get some water, pull it out, and wow, this is cold. And it turned out to be a little can of grapefruit juice, but it was packaged in this aluminum that I'd never seen before. It was a really cool package.
Mm,
And at the time, the beer companies had decided they wanted to go to PET bottles, plastic bottles for beer.
mm,
Horrible package for beer.
yeah.
Not a great package for soft drinks because, as you know, it just doesn't keep it as cold uh,
Yeah.
as you would like, or it doesn't feel as cold anyway.
Mhm.
So I brought that package back to Anheuser-Busch and Miller Beer, and I said, "Hey guys, make this for me. I want to sell an aluminum bottle in 7-Eleven, and all I
Wow.
ask for is just give me exclusivity." Now, what I should have done is gone out and gotten a design patent for it or a
Yeah.
utility patent for it. I'd be
Yeah.
making a penny a can now. Um, but I didn't. I just said all I'd like is exclusivity. And they gave it to Budweiser. It took them 2 years to get around to making it. I finally got them to do it. And they created the package. It sold well. It ends up being today a fabulous package. It's all the stadiums across the country and
Wow.
literally worldwide. It's taken off. And of course,
That's
you see
incredible.
now bottled water, Coke, Pepsi, all these other players have aluminum bottles today.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned it's sold elsewhere now. I'm curious, how did that exclusivity work, or how long did that play out for 7-Eleven and Anheuser-Busch? Was it solely Anheuser-Busch, the exclusivity part, or what
Yeah,
did that look
well,
like?
they did it first. They were the first to come to market, and these
Got it.
things are no small decision. I had
Yeah.
to take it all the way to August Bush, August the 4th. Ultimately, made the decision and agreed he would make it happen,
Mm,
because the cost of producing a line, the details of having a bottle that will keep carbonation properly in a different kind of package other than what they had in the past, all of those things had to be solved, and they spent quite a bit of money to get there.
yeah.
So all I asked for was give me 6 months of exclusivity so that I can have a package that's only available at 7-Eleven. And that was my mission basically across all new products. Try to find something that's not available anyplace else,
Mm,
bring it into the store, and then offer it exclusively so that whenever
yeah.
customers come in, they go, wow, I've never seen that anywhere before.
I love it.
Yeah, it works.
Amazing.
It works.
Yeah. So getting into the transition from 7-Eleven and then into Blockbuster, we can have 100 podcasts just on this. But what was that journey like for you? The departure of 7-Eleven and the entrance into Blockbuster. If you can touch on the stage Blockbuster was at that point too.
Sure. Well, first of all, I didn't want to sell 7-Eleven. The Japanese licensee decided to buy it, made us an offer. We're a public company. We didn't have a whole lot of choice. their bigger objective was they wanted to develop China.
Mm,
And there was some urgency there for them to get in and be a partner with a Chinese company to develop the Chinese market. And
wow.
so they bought the company in '05. I had been around now for, at that point, 20 years. And I was ready for a new challenge. And what I discovered at 7-Eleven was A, the power of change and embracing change,
Mm,
B, the power of technology to be able to transform a company. And so I thought, well, with those tools, let me take on a new challenge. What company really needs to embrace change? And I looked at a couple. I looked at Radio Shack, I
mm,
looked at Blockbuster, and my intent was to partner with private equity and take one of those companies private,
mm,
do the transformation outside of the glare of public, you know, trading, which is a whole different challenge when your stock is trading quarter by quarter and you're
mm.
trying to meet expectations. I knew that Blockbuster challenge would be a lot of heavy lifting, so I was trying to take it private.
Yep.
Probably the biggest mistake I made because I was talked into leave it public, no big deal, public private. The board was very supportive, asked me to come in, be chairman and CEO.
Mm,
I didn't have a crystal ball to see what would happen in 2008.
mm.
Because in 2008, the whole world collapsed. The financial markets collapsed. Lehman Brothers, you remember,
Yep.
banks were shut down for a year. And we had $1 billion of debt, a third of which was due in '09.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
now leading up to that point, from '07 to the third quarter of '08, when Lehman Brothers fell, we had doubled our cash flow, basically. We had acquired a streaming video capability that Netflix didn't even have. We had new releases
Mm,
from the studios in a company called Movie Link that we renamed Blockbuster On Demand.
mhm.
So we had a fabulous competitive advantage because we had new movies. They had no movies at that point. They were still doing DVDs by mail.
Yep.
And we were very well positioned to refinance the debt and go forward. But when the financial markets collapsed, the banks were shut and we couldn't get our debt refinanced. Basically, nobody was
Mm,
doing financings. And
wow.
that spooked the market, and they thought we were going to file. Probably never would have filed for bankruptcy because we had 90-day credit terms from the studios. We had plenty of cash flow. We had just reported, I think, 280 million or something in EBITDA,
Wow.
basically plenty of cash for the year 2008.
Yep.
But that fear of bankruptcy, and you'll find a recurring theme in my book about the challenges that fear can cause in
Mm,
personally, in the workplace, and even in society, because it was that fear that sparked the studios to say, well, these guys may not make it. We better not continue to extend credit to them.
mm.
We better pull back. And they pulled back from 90-day credit terms to cash.
Wow.
So for your listeners, in other words, instead of we would rent a movie or buy a movie, sorry, for say $14 or something, a DVD, we'd
Mhm.
rent it 20 times before we ever had to pay for it.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was a very positive cash flow environment. Um, when they pulled our credit terms, now we had to prepay
Mm,
for that movie. So it took about $300 million of liquidity just like that out of the
mm.
business and forced our hand. We had no choice at that point but to go through a restructuring.
Yeah. Wow. So 2008, at this point, what did that kind of journey look like for the team of restructuring? I mean, was it massive layoffs, closings? I'm curious.
It wasn't. The restructurings are not as scary as they seem on the appearance. Remember, 7-Eleven went through a restructuring in 1991
Yeah.
and came out a stronger, better entity. So during that period, my job was to try to find strategic partners who can help us emerge from bankruptcy stronger, healthier, with a better chance of success as a streaming entity.
Yep.
Um, the deal of the century would have been Google. I had Google at the table.
Mm.
The vision was YouTube, everything free, Blockbuster, everything paid.
Yep.
Would have been a fabulous combination. It was going to be a joint venture of sorts. And that deal was ready to be signed, and the rumor of bankruptcy was published by the press,
Mm.
causing Google to pull the deal. And they
Wow.
chose not to go forward. No big deal. I had other strategics at the table. I had Dish Network. I was in discussions with AT&T, with Korea Telecom. I mean, other potential partners that could come in and help us take it to that next level.
Mm.
Dish ended up prevailing. They stayed with us side by side through a restructuring process, helped keep the wolves at bay because there were some that wanted just to liquidate the company and make it go away,
Mm.
and recapture some earnings from buying the debt at a very low cost and then selling all the inventory in the stores.
Mhm.
So we managed to hold that off, got the company sold successfully to Dish Networks for about $350 million.
Okay.
And Dish then kept me on as an advisor for a couple of years, but they had a very different strategy for going to market
Mm.
with digital streaming. Their
Yeah.
plan was to take it straight to mobility instead of using the internet as we know it today.
Mm.
And the reason for that, by the way, people forget that the internet was not a very good experience in 2009, 2010. There's very
Yeah.
weak Wi-Fi capabilities in most households, buffering, slow download times. So Dish wanted to go straight to mobility and straight to like 5G.
Wow.
When they couldn't get there in the window that they wanted, it was Dish ultimately that decided they'd close the stores down and
Mm.
put the digital streaming on the shelf until another day. And they may be back. You never know.
Yeah. I know. I mean, this is kind of a different question, but I know there's like one standing location left. If you can share maybe some of the reasoning behind that, the nostalgia, or I know some listeners are aware that there is one standing location remaining. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure it still is. It was up until recently. It was in Bend, Oregon.
Okay.
And actually, it's a bit of a myth. Outside of the United States, there are still a few out there
Okay.
um, from foreign licensee operations. But in the United States, there was one still remaining, and it was a bit of a precocious store manager. I shouldn't call her precocious, aggressive, let's say,
Yeah.
who went to Dish and said, "Yeah, I know you're closing all the stores. I'm keeping mine open.
Wow.
What's it going to take?" And they allowed her to keep it open. And,
Wow.
frankly, she leveraged what is an amazing brand loyalty for Blockbuster. I
Yeah.
still today, I travel all over the world. I mentioned to you, I just got back from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all these
Wow.
places. I was in Australia recently
Mhm.
talking about the book, Education is Freedom. And I used the Blockbuster story as an example of learning and eliminating fear and all this stuff. And sure enough, in Australia, as an example, at least 3 or 4 people came up to me with their Blockbuster card.
Wow.
Remember that blue plastic ID?
Yeah. 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 That's
People
incredible.
still carrying it around.
That's amazing.
I know.
Wow. So, I mean, Jim, your story just completely resembles starting small and all the different obstacles that you had to overcome within leadership and the restructuring. Getting into some of your book, then, what was the inspiration, would you say, to then write Education is Freedom after such an amazing journey that you've had so far?
Well, it was just that. It was like, if I can do this, anybody can. And I
Yeah.
look around in the professional world and the academic world, I see so many people paralyzed in fear. They're like,
Mm.
"Oh, it's the American dream's dead. I can't do it. The man is keeping me back." And it's just a bunch of lies people are telling themselves.
Mm.
Opportunity is greater today than ever before. And yet, it starts with us individually. It starts inside of us that we have to have that drive to do something about it. And it's just not that hard.
Mm.
So if you can channel the idea that you can learn anything,
Yeah.
this combination of knowledge, which is, I mean, today, are you kidding me? Get on the internet, you can find out how to do anything on YouTube practically, right?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
seeking knowledge, learning how to do something, and then having the confidence, belief in yourself, if not a higher authority or a universe even, but that combination of having some faith in yourself and having faith in a higher power and the ability to go seek knowledge.
Mm,
What can't you accomplish? What do you have to be afraid of?
mm, love it.
So that's my
Well,
mission, to be out there encouraging it. So I built a roadmap, if you will,
yeah.
how to address change, how to have confidence, clarity of listening inbound and speaking outbound,
Mm,
creativity, curiosity,
mm,
critical thinking, basic fundamentals of how to learn, and then the why to learn. Collaboration, the need to work with others, cultural literacy, the reality that we keep hearing all this stuff about diversity is bad and DEI and blah blah blah.
mm,
It's all craziness because the
yeah.
reality is the world is shrinking
Yeah.
fast with technology,
For
and
sure.
my competitive advantage in a global operation was something I call cultural literacy. The idea that I seek out other cultures to learn from them, and
Mm,
it was a huge advantage in a global corporation to be able to go to China and do business comfortably, or
love that.
Thailand, or Japan, or Asia, anywhere in Asia or Europe. My tour to the Middle East is just all about learning other
Mm,
cultures,
I
which
love
gives
that.
you a huge competitive advantage. And then finally, the foundation, if you will,
Mhm.
of this idea of, I call it the hierarchy of success, learning
Yep.
to learn. Foundation is another C that I just call character. And that's something I think is one of the most important elements of the book. The idea that each of us we're like a consumer product.
Mhm.
We're a
Yeah.
brand. People don't think of it that way, but because it's not written right there, Coca-Cola you know, or AT&T or whatever. It's not written on my chest, but
Yeah.
every interaction that I have with another individual is communicating my brand. And
Mm,
it's a
that's for yeah.
combination of physical appearance. Do I respect the other person by dressing appropriately?
Mm,
Sometimes I have to wear a tie if I'm in an environment where it's the appropriate thing to do. So that physical appearance, but also then more important is what's inside. That's why we
mm,
choose Fiji water instead of, some other bottled water brand, because the integrity of what's inside I can
yeah.
count on.
I love it. Jim, so many great nuggets, and I like to conclude each episode with this. You really just shared a lot of it, but if you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring leader or entrepreneur, something you learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
A number one is be fearless.
Mm,
Um, it's really the single biggest obstacle to people in their career. It's that little person on your shoulder that says you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you can't do something,
mm,
and it's a killer, and it's so unnecessary. Because as I said, armed with knowledge, what do you
mm.
have to be afraid of?
Yeah, love it. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time today. And to the listeners out there, I hope to see you at the Starting Small Summit, where I have so many more questions. And then also we do an open Q&A at the summit with the panel as well. So, Jim, thank you again. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Education is Freedom, and we'll have the links down below.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person. We're going to have a blast. It'll be a good
Awesome.
session.